Hi, everybody. Hi. So we came all the way from Europe to speak about the last topic of conversation of the day. The one you've been waiting for, I know. VAT and the custom procedures that goes with it in the Med. You are okay, I know. So hopefully, by the end of the session, we'll make it a little bit clearer, or not. We'll see. My name is Chris, so my company is EasyTax, based in Nice, France. So we do fiscal representation, so we do all the accounting for the owning companies of the yachts that comes to France to do chartering, and we look after all the VAT matters on the charters mainly. And we're part of a brokerage house, a brokerage custom house, so we can do custom formalities, importation, exportation, etc.
My name is Alex, and I'm the director of a company called Tax Marine. I'm based in Barcelona, Spain, and we are part of the network with EasyTax, providing the same kind of services for yachts, which intend to charter in Spanish waters. So we help in all the process of getting licensed, import, exports, this kind of procedures.
Yeah. So. Can I just?
Yeah, you are.
I mean, I'm sure pretty much all of you already know quite a lot about VAT because now it's been on for several seasons. But maybe some of you are new, or maybe some of you have specific questions you'd like to clarify. So we don't really have an official presentation. We just have a couple of slides, mainly maps, which we'll use. But if you send a boat over for a charter in the Med, you have to ask yourself a question: what about the VAT at one stage, and where do I pay it, and at what rate? So there's two questions. First one, where do I pay it? There's two rules. First one, easy. If you start a charter in a European country, so in France, for example, you pay the VAT in France following French rules. If you start in Italy, you do the same, but in Italy you follow Italian rules at the Italian rate, and therefore the boat needs a VAT number. It doesn't matter if after you exit the EU, if you do Italy and then you stop in Montenegro and you go back after in Croatia, it doesn't matter. You pay the VAT where you started because you started in an EU country, so you pay the VAT in Italy. That's where you started. The second scenario is what happens if I start outside of the EU, like in Montenegro, for example, or Albania. Now there's a lot of charters starting there, or Turkey. There's no European VAT where you start, obviously, but when you come in the EU, you pay the VAT on the time you spent throughout the different territorial waters. Again, it depends on the country. So if you start in Montenegro and you go to Croatia, you spend 2 days in Croatia, you pay 2 days worth of VAT at the Croatian rate. If you finish after in Italy, you pay Italian VAT on the time you spent in the Italian waters. Not all the countries apply this rule. Most of them in the Med. Spain, you'll tell us more about it, but France didn't. So if after going to Italy you end up in France, there won't be any VAT, French VAT, to pay on that specific scenario.
Yeah. Well, I think, to be honest, Chris explained pretty well how it works. And basically what I would like you to be aware, it's how it goes. This is the laser. Right. Now, basically, it's as Chris mentioned. In terms of Europe, we must consider that there are parts of the European territory which are not part of the customs or the VAT territory, and that might bring different scenarios in terms of chartering or implications in terms of customs formalities. For instance, go back. Oh, sorry.
It's over.
It's over.
Did that help?
All right. So, well, anyway, basically what I wanted to say is that there are mainly, there are basically two main rules which applies all across Europe. One, for import and export formalities, is the customs regulations, which would determine it's applicable all across Europe the same way in principle. And then we have the VAT directive, which determines what are the rules applicable on charters, which these are implemented into the different member states in a different way, which is the reason why taxation might differ from one member state to another, right? Moving forward, what's the situation in Spain? As in the rest of countries, any yacht which intends to charter in Europe has to open a VAT position in that specific country in order to collect VAT from charterers and pay it to the relevant tax authority of the country where the charter is starting, right? For the specific case of Spain, the applicable VAT rate, it's 21%. It's a flat VAT rate with no reductions, as it might happen in Italy or in France. And the procedure to register is pretty straightforward. Basically, it consists, as I said, to open a VAT registration position. Then the situation in Spain was that until 2013, the jurisdiction was closed for super yacht charters because we had tax applicable on the value of the yacht at 12%. This was removed or it was amended 2013. So the second step in order to charter in Spanish waters would consist to apply on this tax relief. And later on, in order to charter in Spain, it is necessary to get a authorization or a permit from the maritime authorities, which basically consists on a compliance procedure and go through all the paperwork of the yacht and crew in order to determine that the yacht is eligible for to carry out commercial charters in Spain. Your turn.
Do you have questions about Spain? Yeah. Do you have a mic? Do you need one?
When you're applying for the license, that captain, if the captain changes,
If the what?
if there's a captain change,
No, there's no need to change the cruising permit. As long
the boat or goes with the boat itself.
correct. As long there is an affidavit which is submitted by the owning entity of the yacht and a statement, which basically there is a commitment on the owning company or the yacht itself to be in compliance with all the regulations. So if there is a change of captain, there is no need for a new.
But I guess it is a change of ownership, then...
A change of ownership, it's a completely different
Okay,
scenario.
start again.
Yeah.
Please.
When do you collect the VAT
From the stakeholder, we normally ask for the VAT during the charter or at the start of the charter from the stakeholder. But we pay it to the tax office when we have to do the VAT return. At the latest, it is the middle of the following months. But that depends on the countries, and because some companies are on quarterly, so they do a VAT return every 3 months, and some companies are on monthly return.
So what is your due diligence? If the order is canceled, that VAT is not due. So what's your due diligence?
Yeah, well, that is an interesting question because, there has been a binding ruling that has been submitted recently in France, and we are waiting for an answer if the VAT is due on fees that are kept by the owning company if the charter is cancelled.
On the commission?
No, not on the commission. If a charter...
To be part of that charter. Because if a charter's canceled, the funds go back.
Oh, if the funds go back, there's no VAT due. But if for whatever reason the funds are kept by the owning company, even so the charter didn't happen, that's a different matter. Okay, yeah, if the funds go back, then there's no VAT.
So if there's earned income,
Exactly.
earned income.
Exactly.
they still want to collect that back. You don't have a ruling.
We are waiting for an answer, but we will keep you informed. Daphne?
That have had this problem ongoing. I can tell you, I mean, I've spoken to Chris about it, as well as, other companies that represent owners of ours as fiscal agents, that they're also demanding at the beginning of the charter, and we feel as brokers would, that what happens if this doesn't happen and doesn't carry on or changes. So we have done, actually, on occasion, against what they're asking us and only paid it at the end so that we're protecting all parties as escrow agents and stakeholders.
I mean, that's okay. A huge due diligence issue, and I don't think anything should be paid until the actual charter has been
started. Yeah, finished. I mean, there's two things. It's true that it depends on the fiscal agent because everybody has their own procedures. But the VAT is due 1 month after the start of the charter. So except if the charter lasts for more than 1 month, then there's no liability, immediate liability. But there's one thing that you have to consider, is that the fiscal agent is responsible of the payment of the VAT. And that is one reason why some of the fiscal agents will ask for the VAT immediately.
That's why due diligence.
Exactly. If the charter is cancelled, we ask for the proofs that it's cancelled, that you refunded the money, and then we send the VAT back.
That brings me to my final question. Is if this is legal, legalities, there's nothing about procedures. Legalities are something totally opposite. So for every company that's collecting VAT tax, they need to be following the same. And I don't understand why anybody would pay a VAT tax until
Obviously, in terms of as a tax representative, what you would like, you try to protect yourself. So you try to collect that VAT as soon as possible in order to have the funds to be in a safe position with the tax agency. That's it.
I've never had that situation. That came up. You all need to be aware of it because it all does come down to who you use for taxes.
Absolutely. But my understanding of the industry, I mean, at least in France, is that most fiscal agents, they don't ask for the VAT at least before the charter starts, except if there is maybe 1 or 2 that do differently. But for me, that's the way it works out. Mm-hmm. You had a question, Daphne, or?
The European Union for importation.
Okay.
Let's say a boat expects to come into France as its initial base port and doesn't really get any charters there and decides they get their first charter in Croatia. It's really just about importation initially, correct? And that then they just go through the application process to charter.
Exactly. Importation, for maybe those who don't know, it's basically a custom document. Either the boat is EU, it's got an EU flag, an EU company, so it's got a VAT status that's resolved. But if it's a boat that's foreign with a non-EU flag, non-EU company, those boats comes to the EU, it has to be imported. It's a custom document that's done that allows the boat then after to move freely. So it's got its custom and VAT status resolved. This has to be done every time the boat comes, and if the boat leaves, the boat is exported. If it comes back the season after, it has to be done again.
The yacht gets what it's called a free circulation status, and then it comes into play. The previous map I tried to explain you in terms of those little jurisdictions like Montenegro, Gibraltar, which play an important role in all these export-import formalities because these ports of call are used as jurisdictions in order to formalize export or importations. Yeah.
But for the importation, there is only a few member states, countries that really allows a commercial boat to be imported. France, Malta.
To be imported without a proper settlement of VAT. Exactly. I mean, you can import a yacht anywhere in Europe, but there are some jurisdictions which would require a proper disbursement, an effective payment of the VAT on the whole of the yacht, whilst other jurisdictions like France, Malta would not require that payment.
Is it true that for a yacht that has a charter license in Spain, if the owner is not Spanish or Spanish flag yacht, that the owner is open to having to pay income tax on the charter revenue?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with it. It's true. You're right. Okay. There is when I previously mentioned which are the rules which come into play when chartering a yacht in the EU. Basically, there is the customs code, the VAT directive, and then national law. In the particular case of Spain, we have a law which is the non-resident income tax law, which applies to foreign entities which are obtaining income from Spanish source, right? That law does not apply when there is a tax treaty in place between the jurisdiction where this company, which is obtaining income in Spain, it's based, and Spain, right? But when there is no tax treaty in place, that Spanish rule applies. This is the case, for instance, for yachts which are owned under Cayman Island entities, Isle of Man, any jurisdiction which does not have a tax treaty in place. In that case, it might happen that the charter fee could be subject, in addition to the 21% VAT rate, to a 24% income tax.
Right. So that makes it very difficult, I think.
And there are ways to go around that.
Okay.
But
it does
you're
make it
right.
difficult for us to ask our owners to open their yacht for charter there when they are subject to an income tax.
There are ways to go around. Usually, the typical way is to lease the yacht from the owning company to an entity which is incorporated for that purpose in a suitable jurisdiction which has a tax treaty in place with Spain. So that way, it's avoided.
In Malta. Okay.
Questions?
Good.
I don't know if we're waiting for our next question, otherwise, do you have maybe questions about the reduced rate on the charter fees? That's also another specificity to some of the countries. In France, as you know, if you start a charter in France, the VAT is 20%. But if during the course of the charter you exit in the international waters, and you can see on there, you have that little, well, I'm a bit shaky, but you have that blue line. Okay. I should stop the coffee, I think. And that's the limit of the international waters. So during the course, if the boat comes out, then there's a reduction of the VAT to half the charter fee. So it's 20% on half the fees. You have the same principle in Italy. There it goes from 22% on 30% of the charter fee. So it's an equivalent of 6.6 based on the length of the boat and the type of propulsion. And you also have that same idea in Malta. Spain?
No, Spain not.
Please.
Would you consider going out?
So the international waters officially is
12 miles.
Yeah, it's 12 miles from the baseline. So it can be a little tricky, especially in some areas, because sometimes there's no international waters. If you see here, and I'll point it with the finger, like here, okay. So if you leave from Livorno, for example, and you go to Corsica, if the boat goes straight, he will go from Italian waters to French waters. So he hasn't been in the international waters. Oh yeah, exactly. And if after he comes down to Sardinia, in between the south point of Corsica and the north point of Sardinia, there's no international water. So you really have to go all the way out. So in some areas it's tricky. Also, you see around the it really goes way, because the line follows the coastline, but if you have a couple of islands, then the international water line will be pushed further by 12 nautical miles from these islands. So sometimes you can be at 20 miles from the mainland, but if you've got a couple of islands, you're not actually in the international waters. So, but otherwise, for France, from the moment that you can prove the exit, the reduced rate is validated. Italy is more difficult. We've spoken about that many times with many people. There is sometimes some different interpretation from one agent to another. It will take, true. It will take time for clarification.
Oh, here's a clarification. Whale watching, is that international?
How far are the whales? How far, okay.
International.
I have a quick question. Is there Venice? If you start a charter in Venice, what is the VAT implications for that, and how long are you allowed to stay there before you have to pay a higher tax? There used to be. I don't know if anything is still different with Venice itself. And like you immediately leave, do you have to pay VAT, and what is the percentage of the tax that you have to pay on it? Like
if you start in Venice, you are subject to this reduction, that you might benefit from reduction because Italy applies this mechanism, and the effective VAT rate would depend on your effective navigation. So basically,
Croatia, the VAT rate.
You mean if you go to Croatia from Venice?
Well, if you sail through the international waters, depending on the agent, but there it is 6.6. It's a reduced rate. Yeah.
Yeah.
You will not pay tax. You will not pay VAT in Croatia because you started in an EU country. So you pay the VAT to the country where you started. So you pay Italian VAT on the charter fee.
Yeah, but
different.
Because Montenegro, it's not an EU
Exactly,
country.
Yeah.
Chris, what about if you pick up in Naples and cruise over to Porto Cervo?
That's good, yeah. If you go from Naples and you go straight, clearly you're sailing through a huge body of international waters. Of course, you always have to prove that. First, I mean, usually the contract is drafted to that regard with a reduced rate. But if at the end of the day you don't have any proofs that you sailed through, it's true that in theory, the tax office, if they audited the case, they could say, well, you know, you sailed up to Livorno and you crossed over and you followed the coastline. Prove me that you sailed the international waters. That's why it's important that the captains, you know, always log the voyages.
Have you had any issues with those trying to get reduced France VAT to cruise more time in Spain? Like starting in France, I mean, any issues that...
Well, I mean, the difficult one with Spain is that we have this matriculation tax, which in case there is a proper challenge of the whole charter, and ended with an assessment or an enforcement of that tax, that would be a serious issue. But in principle, as long as guests embark in France and disembark in France, there shouldn't be an issue in terms of challenging the French VAT by the Spanish authorities.
Do you have questions for Croatia? You know the rule changed recently. There's VAT obviously since the 1st of May. Exactly, 13%, 1-3. The VAT rate in Croatia is 25%, but the VAT for the charter fees is 13, 1-3. So that means if the boat stops in Croatia and buys fuel or provisioning or a piece of equipment, they will pay 25% VAT. But the VAT due on the charter fees is 13%. And that doesn't matter if you go out in the international waters, it's a flat rate. Okay. Thank you.